The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency António Costa, Prime Minister of the Portuguese Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
Mr. President, Excellencies, in 1945, delegates of 51 countries met in San Francisco to found the United Nations. They made a commitment to maintain peace, international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, and spare future generations of the scourge of war. 77 years later, we still haven't achieved these goals. Around the world, many children and even many adults have never known peace. In Europe today, we are confronted with the unjustified and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in a flagrant violation of the international law, primarily the Charter of the United Nations. A war with devastating effects for the Ukrainian people, brutally affecting the civilian populations. The gravity of the acts committed make an independent, impartial, and transparent investigation imperative so that the crimes committed do not go unpunished. We cannot, therefore, fail to condemn once again the Russian aggression and here to reinforce Portugal's support for the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Russia must cease hostilities and allow the creation of a serious, sustained ceasefire and peace-oriented dialogue. This is not the time for Russia to escalate the conflict or to make irresponsible threats to resort to nuclear weapons. We welcome the efforts of the entire United Nations system, in particular its Secretary General, to resolve this conflict and to mitigate its damaging effects, such as the food crisis. Once again, it has been the most vulnerable who have felt the impact of the energy and food crisis. The most have been buffeted by almost 3 years of health crisis. That is why we reiterate our solidarity with all the peoples around the world, and particularly in Africa, who are suffering the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That is why we want to make it very clear and unequivocal that the necessary sanctions applied to Russia cannot affect, directly or indirectly, the production, transportation, and payment of cereals and fertilizers. Excellencies, peace was not definitely won in 1945, but the world has changed radically since then. We need a representative, agile, and functional Security Council that is able to respond to the challenges of the 21st century without becoming paralyzed, and whose actions are scrutinized by the other members of the United Nations. A Security Council that incorporates a comprehensive view of security, recognizing inter alia the role of climatic change as an accelerant for conflict. A Security Council where the African continent and at least Brazil and India have seats. And where small countries are fairly represented. A global vision of security is essential, and the new agenda for peace advocated by the Secretary General. An agenda focused on the conflict prevention and capable of ensuring the adequate, predictable, and sustainable funding for peace building. As an international community, it is our duty to support the efforts of the African nations for the stability of their continent, seeking African solutions to African problems. The worsening security and humanitarian context in the Sahel also requires a concerted, multidimensional effort, ensuring humanitarian assistance to populations affected by the multiple crises that plague the region. The, the evolving terrorist threats around the world, but in particular in Mozambique, the Sahel, and the Gulf of Guinea, requires a targeted and effective responses from states. Over the past decades, my country has established itself as a reliable partner for global peace and stability. Currently, at the services of the United Nations, we are present in 4 theaters of peacekeeping operations, namely MINUSCA. I am very proud of the recognition our military and our security forces have received for their contribution to the crisis and conflict management on all continents under the aegis of the United Nations or NATO or the European Union. Excellencies, it is undeniable that there is a link between climate and security. Today, more than ever, we are feeling the effects of climate change. Heat waves or intense cold, droughts, fires, floods, and storms. Countries like Portugal, which suffer from coastal erosion, increased droughts, and the drama of forest fires, clearly understand the urgency of climate action. It is not necessary to explain it to countries like Pakistan, which today is suffering the truly devastating consequences of the rest of the world's climate inaction, or to coastal countries, particularly small island nations, which are feeling their livelihood being threatened year after year by the rising seawaters. We hope that the next COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh can be a moment that leads to an inclusive transition, ensuring a more balanced allocation of climate finance between mitigation and adaptation. Portugal has been at the forefront of the decarbonization process, having been the first to commit to achieve carbon neutrality by 2025, a commitment that we assumed in COP22 after Marrakesh. We believe that this goal is feasible from an economic and technological point of view. It will be a promoter of employment and a generator of social justice. We will seek to accelerate these commitments as we have already done so with our goal of ending the electricity production through coal, which we achieved last year. By 2026, we want to increase from 60 to 80% the weight of renewables in the electricity consumed. For this, we will continue the strong investment we have been making in solar, wind, and ocean energies, and invest in the use of renewable gases such as green hydrogen. Excellencies, the sea is one of the platforms for climate, where climate is projected. We welcome the active participation of all states in the Second Oceans Conference, which we had the honor of co-organizing with Kenya. The Lisbon Declaration constitutes real action plans for achieving the SDG 14 on the conservation and sustainable use of ocean resources. As part of the commitments made by the various countries and the entities present, Portugal also reiterated its commitment to protect at least 30% of the marine areas by 2030, We went further. By then, we want 100% of the maritime space under Portuguese sovereignty or jurisdiction to be assessed as being in good environmental status. After Lisboa, there's still a lot of work to be done on the ocean agenda, and I am sure that France and Costa Rica will pursue this mission with redoubled energy. This effort that Portugal and Kenya has developed. So we therefore call on the conclusion of the negotiations of the post-2020 Global Diversity Framework that enshrines the 30 by 30 goal. We also advocate the progress of the negotiations on the Treaty of the Marine Biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction by the end of this year. Excellencies, the transition to a prosperous future, a green and digital future, cannot leave anyone behind. Social policies that must be at the heart of our action, of the development of our economies, of the fight against climate change. We therefore support the preparation process for the social summit proposed by the Secretary General. And we need to respond in a more quicker way to the crises. We need to work on a pandemic treaty to deal with all of these for the implementation of all the sustainable goals, especially in those countries that are most vulnerable. All these challenges are highlighted. All these challenges highlight even more the universal, indivisible, and interdependent nature of the human rights, whose respect, protection, and promotion are a top priority for Portugal's internal and external action. Imbued with the humanist spirit that our historical responsibility as forerunners of the abolition of the death penalty impose on us, we continue to fight for its universal abolition. No future will be truly transformative without pluralist, inclusive societies that promote gender equality and combat racial discrimination, racism, xenophobia, and all forms of intolerance. The fight for gender equality and women's empowerment is, in this respect, absolutely crucial. Without winning it, it is not possible to meet our human rights obligations, nor the successful implementation of the Agenda 2030 and the Agenda for Sustainable Development. It is also crucial that we pay particular attention to the impact of conflict situations on the rights of women and girls and the fundamental role that they can play in peace building and the consolidation processes. I therefore want to reiterate our support for the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda of the United Nations. Excellencies, as a country of immigration and immigration, we will continue to participate constructively in the discussions of the global governance on migration. And we will continue the good path we have been following on national territory for the integration of immigrants to the promotion of regular pathways for labor mobility. We have played an active role in welcoming migrants and refugees. In a clear expression of solidarity, having welcomed refugees from Ukraine and Afghanistan, among others. Excellencies, the transformative potential of the United Nations is immense, but it must be given the tools to realize the high expectations placed on it by the people around the world, particularly the expectations of the young people. 1/3 of the world's population is under 20. It is therefore essential to ensure that young people participate in the decision-making process and that their voices be heard effectively. We will therefore continue to take a leading role in the youth agenda and support the work of the UN Office for Youth. Excellencies, the United Nations is a global forum for consultation among peoples. The challenges we face today make it unavoidable that we must continue to adapt our common home, making it more efficient, fairer, and more representative. Portugal is ready to make its contribution, and therefore we are candidates to the Security Council for the biennium 2027-28. We hope once again to deserve your confidence, because only together all countries can build a more peaceful, more sustainable, and a more inclusive future. With the strengthening of multilateralism is no longer just an option, it's an absolute necessity in order to face the global challenges. It is time to move from words to actions, with more cooperation, more solidarity, and more multilateralism. Portugal will not miss this call. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Portuguese Republic for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. And now the Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Nicole Pashinyan,